Hi, and welcome to this week's version of the video essay. And as you can see, it looks a little bit different this week. I'm trying out something new. This is an app called MMHMM, and it's got a free application, free program for a year for teachers, for educators, and so I'm giving this a shot. It's a pretty cool little program, and hopefully this will make something a little different. I'm thinking about using it for some of my classes this year to make videos for my students, so I figured I'd give it a shot here. So speaking of students and classes, today I want to talk about the virtual classroom, and in particular the concept of social presence. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is social presence in the virtual classroom. And this was really inspired by two articles that I read, one by Oztek and Kehrwald, and the other one by Borup West et al. And both of these deal a bit with social presence in blended courses and in the virtual space in general. And so the first thing we have to look at is, what the heck is social presence? This is a huge term, and it is so big. It's easy just to quote the great Justice Potter Stewart and say, I know it when I see it. Because social presence, like pornography, is so broad, it's really hard to define. And so that's the quote that Potter Stewart gave. He was asked to define pornography, and he said it was, it's I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And that's the definition that the Supreme Court used for a long time. Appeals to the prurient ancestors. And social presence, similarly, is overly broad. The textbook definition is when a mediated interaction doesn't seem mediated. A salient rather than superficial impression is created. So you have a deeper impression, a deeper bond. But as Oztek and Kehrwald point out, it can be used for almost any type of relationship, almost any affinity, risks being overly broad. And it has been used in the past in a whole bunch of different ways to look at a lot of different types of affections, of affinities, to the point where there's a question of how useful is the term social presence. Now, Oztek and Kehrwald define this in virtual learning as the degree to which individuals represent themselves and perceive others in mediated spaces. And I rather like this working sort of definition, and they argue that there needs to be a more narrow definition. In fact, their article is called Social Presence Reconsidered, Moving Beyond, Going Back, or Killing Social Presence. And they wind up saying that we should limit social presence, and I agree with that. I think a narrower definition is ultimately more useful and more usable. And so the degree to which individuals represent themselves and the degree to which they perceive others. So how big of an impact are you getting from this person? Do you feel like you're making a connection? And this brings us then to the big question for today, which has to do with how to achieve social presence, and whose social presence is it anyway? And first of all, I want to look a little bit at how to achieve social presence. The other article that I mentioned, the Borup et al. Article, Borup's from George Mason University, and he and some colleagues from Brigham Young looked at the impact of video feedback on instructor social presence in blended courses. Now, they made a mistake, I think, of looking at blended courses. So every course had an in-person and online component. And they were looking for video feedback, and they found that video feedback was helpful, but they couldn't draw any kind of causal links. They couldn't make really good statistical analyses, because they didn't have any situation in which there wasn't a video presence. There was always some in-person and some on-camera interaction. And so since the in-person interaction allowed students to ask questions and get direct input that way, it didn't create quite the situation, the best case contrast, to really look at how well video plays into social presence. And so they weren't able to come up with the conclusions that they would really have liked. But they point out that you really make a bigger connection with people when you can see them. And I think if we think about it, just intuitively, that's kind of correct. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this video this way, because I've yet to figure out how to be able to do this in Keynote, and so I'm giving this a shot. And how to achieve social presence. I think I am a little more connected when you can see me and see some of those micro cues that are going on. I opted for the grainy look here in part because I just wanted to play with something different, and I have a lousy background behind me when it comes to working with these sorts of virtual backgrounds, and as a result I thought this one was just a good compromise. Anyway, video definitely seems to help with social presence, but then this brings us to a question of whose social presence are we concerned about? Does it matter if, as long as students feel the instructor's social presence, does it matter if instructors feel students? How important is that? And that's, I could not find any real information on that, and I think that's something that we should be looking into. Once again, I'm going to point out a hole in the studies that I seem to be seeing. But I'd like to know, does it matter if instructors feel connected to students as long as students feel connected to instructors? Another point I want to bring up with something like Borup's work, giving video feedback on every assignment, even giving video feedback on only major assignments, is lengthy. It's tedious, and it takes longer to give quality video feedback than it does to jot a few things down or to type a few comments in. I think we would find, if we did a survey of instructors, that most teachers would tell you that it's easiest just to jot a few notes into the assignment, a hand-printed copy. It's harder, but not onerous, to respond with some text comments. And it's a lot harder to sit down and film, a bunch of comment sections. That I think is just going to be more difficult. It's going to be more time consuming. And so the question then becomes, how do we carve out time to do that if that is something that's essential? But I'd like to know more about, does it matter if students feel each other's presence? Does it matter if instructors feel students' social presence? And how can those be built? Do instructors need to have face-to-face contact with students in order to feel student social presence? Or is just an icon and some questions? If you have kids who ask good questions in class but never turn their cameras on, does that create social presence? Is that as effective as a kid who turns their camera on? I do not know. And my working hypothesis would just be that it will have an impact. I don't know what it's going to be. And so that's what I'm going to say. I'm just going to hypothesize that there is going to be an impact, there will be an effect, but I don't know what that effect is going to be. I'm not going to venture to say based on my own experience, because I had a few kids who turned their cameras on a lot last year, and they never registered with me as having any real presence beyond just the fact that, they were there in class. And I had other kids who never turned their cameras on, who, because of typing questions in, or who, because of verbally asking questions, I felt a lot more connection with. And so I think that, again, post-pandemic seems like a great time to look at these sorts of things. The virtual learning experience is really fresh in everybody's mind, and I think we're all aware virtual learning is not going to go away. There's going to be a lot more of it in the future, and we need to figure out how to make it better. And I think one of the big things that people often feel is missing in virtual learning is social presence. And so this is one thing where I'm going to be definitely thinking about this in my classes this year, and kind of looking at that and thinking about it both in terms of the stuff we're going to be doing in person, which is most of it, but I'm still going to have kids doing stuff online. And I'm going to be making videos for the kids to watch, probably using this new software, because I like this, being able to have the slides behind me and, to talk about this stuff and everything. So you can just click back to an earlier slide. You can even click way back, jump ahead. I like this. I think this is going to be a cool app. But I'm going to be making videos. Is this going to have an effect on what the kids do? Is this going to help them? Will having a bigger social presence would that get kids to be more engaged with the material? There's lots of questions here, and I think there's lots for researchers to look at in the years to come, and a lot for educators to think about. Well, I hope you found this a little bit interesting, enjoyable, thought-provoking. If nothing else, take a look at MMHMM, and really cool app. Primarily designed for Macs, but I think they have it for Windows now. That's enough of that ad. Again, I've run really long, but hey, I had a lot to say. So that would wrap this up, and I'm looking forward to the final one of these coming up soon. And until next time, stay safe.